This happened urgently. Japan has launched an irreversible process reclaiming Tbilisi as its own territory. The Kuril Islands are now off the bargaining table, a diplomatic turning point, and Tokyo is providing mega weapons to Kyiv. A promising cooperation has begun, and China is one step away from a shocking decision. A rejection of strategic partnership with Moscow, Sitaki chooses Zelensky. At the same time, there is a silent cutting off of an entire piece of Russian territory, the occupation of Siberia, a harsh punishment for Putin. Meanwhile, Ukraine is taking a step toward Georgia. Kyiv is now taking the lead. Tbilisi is casting off Russian shackles. Putin is under pressure from all sides. The world is holding its breath, waiting for the final explosion. And all of this has happened right now. Hello, I'm Renata Aslanova, and we're getting started. Shock. Tokyo is moving to the front lines. The Japanese dragon has awakened, an unexpected turn of events. Japan is becoming a direct threat to Russia. The Kuril Islands, which Moscow brazenly occupied, are beginning a stage of cleansing from Putin's oppression. An important political shift is being recorded within the country. A female leader is ready to openly fight for the territory against the Kremlin dictator.
Since October, when the ultra-conservative Sanai Takaichi, Abe's protégé, was elected as the country's first female prime minister, Japan has taken steps to strengthen its military capabilities and has even reconsidered its long-standing non-nuclear status.
The Kremlin is caught in a soft power trap. The Japanese government is launching a plan for a quiet annexation of the Kurils through the economy. Tokyo has proposed to Moscow a detailed scheme for seizing the initiative on the islands, ranging from full control over the environment to remote medicine from Hokkaido. It is assumed that Japanese doctors could consult both patients and local Russian doctors, including via the internet. According to Tokyo, Russian and Japanese private companies could organize sea cruises for Japanese tourists. And environmentalists from both countries could work together to preserve the environment. But that's not all. In the field of fisheries, Japan is preparing an offer for Moscow that's impossible to refuse. Joint fish processing and a lightning-fast capture of the seafood market. Tokyo is in fact taking the island's resources for itself. It seems that Russia is losing its exclusive rights to the islands under the guise of cooperation. Japan has officially confirmed that the Kuril Islands are occupied territory which the USSR illegally seized. The disputed islands are considered by Russia to be part of the Sakhalin region, while the Japanese authorities include them in the Nemuro district of Hokkaido Prefecture. The chief cabinet secretary of the Japanese government reiterated this once again.
The Northern Territories are islands over which our country exercises sovereignty. They are the inherent territory of our nation. There have been no changes in the position of the Japanese government. The subject of negotiations on a peace treaty is the territorial status of the 4 islands. This is the consistent position of our country.
Moscow is trembling with fear. Nikolai Patrushev has fallen into a real hysteria. Putin's aide sees Tokyo's actions as preparations for a full-scale return of the territories by force. He is shouting about new territorial claims that will finish off Russia.
Japan is laying the groundwork for making new territorial claims, in particular in the waters of the seas that border Russia. This directly affects Russia's interests in the field of national security.
However, reclaiming its own territory is only part of Tokyo's plan for the complete elimination of the Russian Federation, a fist of alliance against the axis of evil. Japan is increasingly taking Ukraine's side, confidently asserting itself on the world stage. Diplomacy is shifting into the realm of concrete decisions. Japan's foreign minister is moving towards closer ties with NATO. This is about deeper cooperation, defense projects, and increased attention to the Ukrainian army.
Japan intends to elevate its relations with NATO to a new level through concrete cooperation in various fields, including defense equipment and industrial cooperation. In response, Secretary General Rutte fully agreed with this point of view and stated that he would like to further develop relations between Japan and NATO in various areas, highly valuing Japan's cooperation with NATO, including its support for Ukraine through NATO. And
here are the first decisive steps. Tokyo is planning to purchase ammunition for Kyiv. Japan is joining the Pearl Initiative. The country's broadcaster is already reporting this loudly.
Officials stated that Japan will provide funding only for non-lethal defense equipment, possibly including radar systems and body armor.
Meanwhile, another international stage is erupting with new events. The pragmatic cooperation between China and Russia is approaching a dramatic conclusion. The US has nevertheless pushed Beijing to the brink by one step, and Washington is openly declaring that Xi Jinping should turn off the tap on Russian oil, thereby weakening Moscow in Ukraine. This is reported by the Wall Street Journal. The idea is simple: less money for Moscow, more purchases of American energy resources. The stakes are enormous. If Beijing agrees, it could be a serious blow for the Kremlin. Experts are already openly stating that China has absolute power over Russia's economy and could stop the war with just one phone call to Moscow. Xi Jinping has kept the Russian card up his sleeve for years, but now it seems the time has come to lay it on the table.
Russia is a completely China-dependent state. But all of this together could force Xi Jinping to give the order that all world leaders are expecting from him, and which even European leaders keep talking about, as we can see, while they juggle their relations with China. To stop Russia's war in Ukraine. And
yet another powerful slap in the face for Putin. A once loyal ally has started to take away the URF region. China is turning Siberia into its own resource base. This is reported by the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine.
One of the key examples is the Zashalan coal deposit in the Transbaikal region. Its development is being carried out by a joint venture. The extraction is planned for 100 years. The Russian authorities have granted the company tax benefits. Starting from 2027, it is planned to transport 5 million tons of coal to China annually. That's about 500 trucks per day.
Moreover, a road is being built for this purpose, a highway. The jobs are going not to locals, but to Chinese specialists. The machine has been set in motion. It seems this is only the beginning of a silent occupation.
Even the symbol of Russia's natural wealth, Lake Baikal, is gradually becoming part of China's economic interests, highlighting just how much Moscow has lost control over its own resource-rich regions.
It is clear that Xi Jinping has begun to act according to his plan. Behind closed doors, the dictator has decided the further fate of the Russian region. Putin is watching this and, no longer hiding it, is starting to panic, but he can't do anything about it. Right now, a juicy piece of Russia is tipping the scales in China's favor. What will happen next? Will the head of the Kremlin dare to resist? Another shocking piece of news? It seems that Volodymyr Zelensky is making a serious move into Georgia. The post-Soviet train, where the Kremlin is trying to maintain control, is gradually losing steam. And here are the signs. The president has appointed an ambassador to Georgia, a position Ukraine has not filled since 2022.
to appoint Brodovich Mikhailo Frankovich as the extraordinary and plenipotentiary ambassador of Ukraine to Georgia.
It seems that from this moment on, contacts between Ukraine and Georgia are shifting from a cooled-off format to normal diplomatic work. And here is the reaction from the parliament itself.
As you know, the president of Ukraine has appointed an ambassador to Georgia, which on the one hand we welcome as a fact, but on the other hand, one question arises. What has changed? Georgia has not changed its policy, has it?
However, the ice may well start to break. Zelensky is making a diplomatic maneuver. It is noteworthy that the current president of the country is Kyiv, a figure who has already gone down in history. He became the first head of state who was not elected by the people but appointed by the parliament. Obviously, Kyiv's bold move is a signal that we are ready to work even with difficult partners in order not to lose influence in a region important for security.
The current Georgian parliament has extremely low legitimacy. That is why the Georgian opposition does not recognize Kyiv presidential authority, and Ukraine still cannot be. For some time it held a similar opinion, although it did not declare its categorical non-recognition, as happened, for example, in relation to Lukashenko.
Now, however, Ukraine has resumed its diplomatic presence. This can very well help Georgia realize its European aspirations.
Democratic Georgia is part of Europe, and not the Russian world.
The geopolitical plates have shifted. Georgia has taken a step that made the Kremlin flinch. Tbilisi supported the initiative for reparations to Ukraine. This means only one thing. Russian money may be used to compensate for the damage caused by the war. An unexpected event occurred at the diplomatic conference in The Hague. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Georgia arrived in person and openly spoke in support of Ukraine. In her speech, she emphasized the need for justice for the Ukrainian people and essentially sidestepped the topic of the complicated relations between Kyiv and Tbilisi. The structure of the so-called Russian world is noticeably shaking in the Caucasus. And this signal in Moscow could not have gone unheard. The south burns. Ukraine's forces breached enemy lines. A total breakthrough. The enemy is fleeing. Our native land is returning home live on air. Our defenders have launched an unstoppable offensive. The occupiers are desperately trying to plug the gaps, but Ukrainian artillery and drones have turned their rear into a graveyard. All the latest news from the front line. Watch now.
The Ukrainian Armed Forces counteroffensive in the south has disrupted the Kremlin's plans for the spring of 2026. This is stated in a new report by analysts from the Institute for the Study of War.
Right now, at this very moment, what we are currently witnessing down in the southern region is clearly one of those specific strategic attempts being made. We must work to seize the strategic initiative, effectively change the enemy's original plans, and force them to act in accordance with the specific vision that our command has established for this mission. And this neutralizes their advantage in strength.
In particular, due to the advance of the defense forces, the Russian military command has redeployed elite airborne and marine units from the Pokrovsky direction and Dobropilya to the southern front.
We are stabilizing the situation there, conducting counterattacks. It's a back-and-forth kind of war. On the one hand, we are pushing them back, even launching counterattacks and liberating certain small areas, and they are trying to continue in other sectors.
But analysts note that they have fewer and fewer forces left to continue. The Russian group, which was supposed to consolidate its positions over the winter and launch a massive spring offensive, ultimately experienced the opposite effect. There are no fresh units to draw from, and the existing forces are constantly being shifted along the front line to plug gaps. As a result, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine has already noted that the number of enemy assaults has almost halved in some directions. At
different periods and days, they carried out 200, 250, up to 300 attacks daily. Now we are recording around 127 to 125. This indicates that all the resources they are using along the front line are not unlimited. They are now trying to maneuver their troops because they can no longer generate forces along 8, as they noted, central directions from Sumy to Kherson. In
recent days, this has been most noticeable in the area of the settlement of Pokrovsky. There, our fighters continue their advance, and even though the Russian Federation once again transferred its reserves here, it did not change the situation.
Ukrainian fighters managed to secure positions in Ternov, as well as drive the enemy out of Berezov and, likely, enter Novohrihorivka and engage in battles for Sladkoye.
At the same time, Russian attempts to maneuver along the more than 1,200-kilometer front line are opening up new breakthrough opportunities for our military. For example, this is happening in the area of Hulyapol, which all winter was...
This is an incredibly challenging and extremely difficult sector of the front lines. In this intense environment, our brave and dedicated fighters have truly distinguished themselves through their remarkable courage and exceptional service to the nation.
Located in the area near Lyman. As reported by the 3rd Army Corps, the enemy, lacking enough assault troops, decided to advance here using the old proven method, gathering a column of armored vehicles and trying to break through our defenses. The result was...
The outcome was quite predictable. With the dedicated support of brave fighters from the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, the resilient 63rd Mechanized Brigade, and powerful heavy artillery fire from the 60th Mechanized Brigade, every single piece of the advancing enemy equipment was successfully destroyed, as was officially noted by the corps in their report. As a result of the coordinated actions of the units, they destroyed a tank, 3 armored personnel carriers, and eliminated the infantry.
At the same time, the defense forces are not neglecting their deep strike missions. However, along with the ongoing fires at oil refineries, military targets themselves have started appearing in reports more and more frequently. Apparently, the reconnaissance and planning of many missions have reached their final stages.
The main intelligence directorate published a video showing drones attacking 2 patrol ships. The Okhotnik, a Project 1496 M1 Sea Tug, a Project 16640 firefighting vessel, and another BK-16 landing craft. Most likely, kamikaze drones equipped with Starlink antennas were used.
At the same time, assessing the overall situation at the front, analysts from the Institute for the Study of War believe that in March, Russia planned to continue exerting pressure and build on its tactical successes near Orikhiv and Hulyapol, as well as intensify attacks in the Slovyansk-Kramatorsk area. However, the blocking of Starlink and the subsequent advance of the Ukrainian armed forces have clearly disrupted these plans, and now Russia is forced to abandon its major spring breakthrough.
China betrayed Russia. Seizing lands as Trump and Xi's secret deal nullifies the Kremlin. Urgent. The Great Split has begun. China is no longer an ally, launching an open offensive. This is a sentence for Moscow. Here are the details. Russia and China are increasingly talking about a friendship without limits. Moscow calls Beijing its main strategic partner. But now, a new geopolitical game is beginning around this friendship. It's called Russian oil. And
when we consider the current state of Russian-Chinese relations, it is possible to state with absolute confidence that every single season of the year feels just like spring.
At the beginning of April, Trump is preparing his visit to China, and it is there. The US is considering the possibility of asking China to reduce its purchases of oil from Russia, and instead to buy more American oil.
But it's impossible to imagine that the loss of, say, Russian oil volumes would maintain normal conditions in the global energy sector and the world economy.
More likely, a drop in oil volumes will lead to a decline in the Russian economy. But anyway, no matter how you look at it, China today is one of the major buyers of this very oil. And on top of that, Putin sells it to his friend at a good discount.
When it comes to Putin, he quite literally has no other choice at this point. If something really does happen in China and China suddenly stops buying, then things will get much worse. Of course, it simply makes no sense at all for China to refuse this kind of deal, at least as things stand in the world today. Jeez, I honestly don't see what specific incentives Trump could possibly offer to make China refuse such an offer.
At the same time, in the West, it is increasingly said that China has significant influence over the Russian economy, which means it can use this influence in politics as well.
But, this war is fully supported by China, and China could call Vladimir Putin and end this war as soon as tomorrow by stopping the supply of dual-use technologies that they are selling.
Beijing is gradually expanding its economic presence even in regions that were previously considered Russia's sphere of influence. For example, in the countries of Central Asia.
China is strengthening its influence in Central Asia. In Kazakhstan, it is preparing to build a nuclear power plant. In Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, it is seeking to take over the automotive markets. In Tajikistan, it is targeting the mining industries.
China is investing in roads, railways, and infrastructure. Today, it is already the largest trading partner for many countries.
This process has been going on for a very, very long time. Chinese interests in Central Asia vary from country to country, but they have been present almost from the very beginning after the collapse of the Soviet Union. China's influence has grown there so much that it has become visible to the naked eye. If before this was only noticeable to those who closely study these countries, of course, Russia's influence is still felt, but it decreases with each passing year.
Since I already mentioned the friendship without limits, what we're really talking about is that China is strengthening its position even within Russia itself, especially in the Far East. And it seems that the Russians themselves don't really like this very much.
And the Chinese have long been saying, well, Baikal is ours. I say that's right. Soon they'll be saying, Crimea is ours. They're already using all our resources, gold, coal, oil, gas, everything. They're a global power while we live in poverty.
Although the funny thing is, it's actually Russia that invites Chinese companies, counting on investment and regional development.
Putin has brought a lot of old Soviet jokes to life. There was this old Soviet joke. The night on the Finnish-Chinese border passed quietly. Well, that's Putin for you. He's moving at an accelerated pace toward making that joke a reality. And without a doubt, today Russia depends on China in every respect.
Interestingly, within Russia itself now, panic. Russian media are claiming that China intends to reclaim its territories. In
Chinese history textbooks often mention that almost all of Siberia, including Western Siberia up to the Tomsk region, are temporarily lost Chinese lands. And
here, apparently, she decided to play by the Kremlin's rules. After all, Putin also likes to tie everything to history.
Chinese companies are exceptionally active and involved in the Siberian and Far Eastern regions. The Chinese are actively establishing settlements throughout these vast territories and extracting the abundant natural resources available there.
So is the transfer of Russian territories to Beijing just a matter of time?
In my opinion, today this will depend solely on China's desire. Because there are some territories, small ones, but still, there are territories that Russia has transferred to China, legally speaking. It's unclear on what grounds, but they were transferred nonetheless. But of course, if we're talking about large territories like the Far East and Siberia, there the Chinese expansion is economic. In many places, it's simply total.
It seems that China's policy is quite simple. Everyone just chooses what is more beneficial for them, and it doesn't matter whether Putin is involved or not at all.
If someone is just hanging around underfoot, well, that's fine. We'll make use of things here and then we'll see how it goes. If it's profitable, we'll stay in some kind of relationship like that. If it's not profitable, we'll send them packing.
Let Putin go on living in his rosy dreams about a reliable partner in the form of China. In reality, though, Beijing acts according to its own logic. It takes resources, technology, and investments. But it never takes risks for the sake of someone else's interests. Shock. Ukraine has decided to help Moldova. A sensational statement. Ukrainian troops are on combat alert at the border. The armed forces of Ukraine are eliminating the threat from the rear. The decision has been made. This is an explosion. Kotevarov is opening a second front. Watch for all the details. Russian troops in Transnistria pose a potential destabilization threat to Ukraine. That is why Kyiv should keep its troops near its borders. This was stated by former Moldovan Defense Minister Vitaly Marinuta.
For Ukraine, Russian troops in Transnistria are no longer an inert factor. They are seen as a potential platform for destabilization. Ukraine must keep its troops near Transnistria just in case. Even with limited capabilities, their significance remains political and strategic.
The so-called Pridnestrovian Moldavian Republic is an unrecognized quasi-state on the territory of Moldova. It covers the entire Moldovan part of the left bank of the Dniester and has a small enclave on the right bank. Despite its lack of recognition, this pseudo-republic is governed by its own authorities and relies on units of the so-called Russian peacekeepers. This is the only thing that still allows Transnistria
to truly exist in this world means more than just being present. It involves the continuous act of living, breathing, and experiencing every single moment as it unfolds before us in our daily lives.
Transnistria, with a limited Russian contingent, has remained a territory outside Moldova's control for many years. That is,
on the one hand, of course, this is a way to constantly put pressure on Moldova, but on the other hand, it means the presence of Russian troops literally in the very south of Ukraine, close to the strategic city of Odessa.
Vitaly Kulik, head of the Laboratory for Countering Disinformation at KNAO, explains that hostile intelligence agencies operate on the territory of Transnistria. They organize terrorist attacks in Ukraine. In particular, they recruit citizens through social networks. Transnistria, occupied by Russia, has become a potential threat to Ukraine since
2014. Russia has used Transnistria as a staging ground for carrying out information sabotage and has even sent in sabotage groups. In 2014, they operated in Bujak, and in 2022, they attempted to land troops in Odessa. During Euromaidan, representatives of pro-Russian political forces fled to Transnistria.
According to the expert, it is in Transnistria that the most toxic pro-Russian Telegram channels are administered, which recruit Ukrainians to commit terrorist acts for money. They find young people and instruct them on how to make explosives. Such operations are directed by officers of the GRU or FSB.
This is dangerous. There are about 1,500 Russian soldiers stationed there who can cause problems. There are also 8,000 servicemen in the so-called Transnistrian army and thousands more in the special services. This could be a potential threat. They have a multiple rocket launcher system, 6 tanks, APCs, small arms, and they know how to manufacture them. In
December, the media reported that the risk of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups infiltrating Ukraine from the territory of Transnistria had increased. Supposedly, in this way, the Kremlin wanted to divert some of Ukraine's resources to counter threats from the territory of the so-called PMR. It was noted that on the territory of Moldova temporarily occupied by Russia, the so-called PMR mobilization activities had been intensified. The military formations of the unrecognized republic are calling up reservists, and weapons are being taken out of storage at the depots. In addition, according to some reports, drone production has been set up in the PMR territory to serve the interests of the Russian occupiers, and drone operator training centers have been opened.
Therefore, of course, it is in Ukraine's interest. The elimination of this canker, which has been festering for a long time and needs to be eradicated, that is why Ukraine fully supports the territorial integrity of Moldova.
The withdrawal of Russian troops from Transnistria is possible, but it will require some time.
Ukraine is interested in ultimately having all of this eliminated. Of course, Ukraine cannot do this on its own. Moldova must be the one to do this first by one means or another, but Ukraine can provide every possible support. In other words, Ukraine's ultimate strategic goal is the elimination of Transnistria as a phenomenon, so that there are neither Russian troops, nor Russian influence, nor pro-Russian forces there.
A complete resolution of the conflict is expected after the end of Russia's war against Ukraine. This was stated to Moldovan media by Moldova's ambassador to Ukraine, Viktor Chirila.
This is achievable. We must remain optimistic. It is obvious that the final resolution of this conflict largely depends on how the catastrophic war unleashed by the Russian Federation against Ukraine ends. But at the same time, we have our own domestic agenda.
Regardless of the circumstances, there will certainly be no outbreak of war in Transnistria, and Ukraine will guarantee and ensure that this geopolitical entity is completely and permanently eliminated.
The issue of withdrawing Russian troops from Transnistria remains key to the security of both Moldova and Ukraine. But this issue cannot be resolved quickly. It has a clear logic and real prerequisites for gradual progress. The process is real, although lengthy.
Naturally, the question arises, how can this be done? So far, the main methods are economic pressure. But will it be possible to do this without any kind of military operation? And will Ukraine participate in this military operation? All of this remains a question for now. At the moment, nothing of the sort is being planned. But never say never. In any case, Transnistria is indeed a very strategically dangerous region for Ukraine. Therefore, Ukraine will always be interested in eliminating it.
With that, we put a period on our episodes. We continue right now. Follow the most relevant events so we can be the first to tell you about them. Don't forget to subscribe. See you